Number 1. Camping. Me and 5 of my friends decided to go camping one week. It was really a spur-of-the-moment thing, too. We were just in the mood to do something different. We got all of our camping gear together and set out for a minor adventure. We found a great spot to park, and then we hiked out into the woods to find a spot to camp in. It was really nice, and it took us about an hour from the car to find the spot we wanted. Everything was set up, and we had a great time telling scary stories to each other, and then just talking for a little bit. It was pretty late when we were getting ready for bed. I was laying in my tent when I suddenly heard someone whistling. Now, it could have just been one of my friends, but it seemed to be coming from the woods. I mean, one of them might have gone out to the woods to go to the bathroom, I guessed. But I also had never heard any of my friends whistling before. So I did what any idiot in a horror movie would do. I got out of my tent, and I looked around at the tents, trying to see if I could see through them and know who was in them. I really couldn't. So I decided I would go out to the woods to see who it was. I didn't get very far before I heard my friend Brad in the tent yell, "Stop that whistling!" It caused me to jump a little, but at least I was not the only one hearing it. I didn't think that it was any of us, and that began to creep me out quite a bit. I also didn't think it could be a bird because it was a familiar song that was being whistled. There had to be someone out there, and who knows what they were up to. After a while of looking around, I finally decided that whoever it was out there was just messing with us. It was just another camper who had come across us and decided they were going to try and scare us a bit. So I decided to head back to my tent and just wait for them to go away. However, the whistling didn't stop when I went into the tent. I don't know how long I was in the tent listening to it before I heard Brad get annoyed once again. And then I heard someone, who I had to assume was Brad, get up and unzip their tent. I heard him grumbling and cursing as he did so. I could tell that he was pretty pissed off. Like me, he must have realized that the whistling was coming from out in the woods and not from any of us. I heard him shouting some things, none that I remember really well, but I could hear his voice moving away from us and out into the woods. I immediately felt alarmed. Brad was the biggest of all of us, and definitely quite capable of taking care of himself. Still, I had a really bad feeling about him going out there like that. I heard Brad arguing with someone, or actually just yelling at them. I didn't hear anything or anyone talking back to him, though. I felt pretty scared at that moment, so I decided I needed to get up and check on him. However, as I got up, I heard Brad call out in what sounded like pain. This, of course, alarmed me, and I got out of my tent as quickly as possible. Thinking on my feet, I grabbed the little hatchet that we used to cut firewood, and I ran into the direction I heard the exclamation come from. It didn't take me long to find Brad, and he was leaning up against a tree, holding his arm. It was dark, but I could tell his arm was bleeding, so I grabbed him and helped him back to the campsite. He wasn't injured very badly. It was a very superficial cut on his arm, but the fact that he had been cut by someone out there at all was scary enough. We had a first aid kit, so we patched up his wound. However, while we were doing it, I heard the whistling start up again. However, this time it was fainter, and became even more faint as the whistler was obviously moving away from us. Brad told us he had encountered a guy who was a bit smaller than him in the woods. He had begun yelling at the guy, who never responded, for being out there so late and keeping us all up. The guy, out of nowhere, lashed out at him with the knife. Before he could react in any way, The guy disappeared into the darkness of the night. Number 2. Brother. I want to first tell you that I have nothing against religion, or at least people being religious. However, religion can be both good and bad, depending upon who it is that is practicing it. A lot of horror movies show religious fanatics, and although many people might think those extreme weirdos in the movies don't exist, I can assure you that they do. My family was one of them. In fact, my father and his brother had a church. My father left the church when my uncle decided that he would give everyone a separate glass for their communion wine. Seriously, because the man decided that everyone would not drink from the same glass, the church split. My dad was a minister, but he wasn't ordained by any church. It was his own thing. This was not unusual where we lived. I am a country boy, born and bred. And when I tell you country, I mean way out in the mountains. I grew up in a shack which had 2 bedrooms in it, one for the grown-ups and one for the kids. Most of our food came from hunting, and we didn't even know what school was, much less did we go to one. When I was 9 years old, my older brother had been acting a bit weird. Being so young, I didn't think anything about it, but my parents seemed concerned about it. Nowadays, I think, people would have diagnosed him as schizophrenic. Back then, and being that they were hillbillies to the core, they thought he was possessed by the devil. So what happened one night, I was woken up in the middle of the night. There was a huge feather bed in our room that all 5 kids slept on. I looked around and noticed that my brother was not in bed. Also, it turned out that I was woken up by some sort of commotion going on in the next room. Now, I could have gotten my butt blistered for getting out of bed in the middle of the night, but I was worried, scared, and curious about all the noises that were going on. So I slipped out of bed, and then I slowly made it out the door. Walking over to my parents' bedroom door, I heard a lot more noises. I can't tell you that I remember what was being said, except that it was a bunch of Bible verses. This wasn't unusual, but it was unusual to be happening in the middle of the night. The doors we had didn't have latches. Like I mentioned, we lived in a shack, so I pulled the door open and peeked in. What I saw has been etched in my memory for the past 60 years. My brother was tied to my parents' bed. His arms and his ankles were secure. He was struggling, trying to get free. He was cursing, which was a shock to me. I didn't hear people swearing at all because it was forbidden in my family and of course our church. But my brother was cursing up a storm, and he was trying to break free of the ropes that he was being tied down with. My dad, my mom, and my uncle were all in the room. My dad was holding a cross, like he was using it as a defensive weapon. My uncle had a huge Bible in his hand, and he was reading verses. I didn't know this at the time because I didn't understand what was going on, but later I learned that they were performing an exorcism on my brother. My dad was throwing what I guess now was holy water, but my brother wasn't reacting to the holy water like I would see in movies that would come later in life. The scene was terrifying, though. I thought that they were torturing my brother, and he definitely was acting like he was being tortured. Scared, I fled back to my room. I got in bed and pulled the covers up over my head. I could hear what was going on, and it was terrifying. I didn't see my brother for days. I think they kept him tied up in there for about a week. When I finally saw him, my dad led him into the bedroom and put him to bed in the middle of the night. I pretended to be asleep. My brother continued to have problems throughout the year and would disappear, and I figured he was tied up again. There were no mental hospitals to put him in, and eventually, one day, he was gone. I think he left in the middle of the night and got lost in the mountains. I didn't see him again after that, and most of us figured he must have died. It was totally a horrible situation, and I wish that he could have gotten care. Number 3. Bully. I used to have problems with bullies, which a lot of kids did, of course, but I can never forget the period of about a year when I lived in rural Ohio for a year. My family moved around a whole lot. Whenever my dad would quit paying the rent and spend the money on beer instead, so we never remained in one place for very long. I was in the 6th grade at the time and a pretty small kid. Also, all of my clothes were thrift store clothes. Plus, I had to get lunch in the free lunch line. I really don't know why, but having to go through that line would often make one the target of bullies. As if it was my fault that my family didn't have much money. Anyway, I really hated this school, and would often try to make myself sick so I didn't have to go to school there. That is how horrible the bullying was. Also, it was a huge school in the county seat. It may have been the only school in the county, so there were a lot of students there. Also, when out in the schoolyard, it was easy to get into fights and not have any teachers break it up. To make it worse, whenever a kid would try and start a fight with me, I would generally not fight back. I would always try to get away instead. However, one time, when I did get into a fight, the bully made the mistake of doing it near the janitor of the school. He broke up the fight, and the bully, a guy named Steve, got in trouble for starting the fight. He had detention for a week. Since he rode the bus to school and lived out in the country like I did, his parents had to come pick him up after school for that week. I can only imagine the trouble he must have gotten into at home for causing them those problems. I was among the first kids to get on the bus, being over an hour away from the school, so I was also one of the last people to get off the bus on the way home. Steve lived a little closer, so he was always off the bus before me. On the first day when he was back on the bus, I was worried that he would try to do something to me. It had been a decent week without having to worry about him, but he just sat in the back of the bus on the way home. There were about 5 kids who got off the bus at his stop. I was shocked when he didn't get off with them. The bus driver must not have been paying attention either, because he didn't say anything about it. The bus just kept going. I kept trying to tell myself that maybe he was just going to a friend's house. But when they got to my stop, which was about the 3rd to the last stop, Steve got off as well. I hurried to start making the walk toward my house. I had been dropped off at the driveway, and it was a pretty long driveway. Fortunately for me, the one good thing is I was pretty fast. I was able to outrun him and get into my house before he could get a hold on me. I locked the door. Immediately when he got to the door, he began pounding on the door. He was yelling and screaming at me that he was going to kill me. Of course, he also stupidly kept telling me to open the door, as if I would be stupid enough to open the door when someone was telling me that they were going to kill me. I was home by myself, as was usual after school, so I was scared and had no idea what to do. Fortunately, although he was bigger than me, he was still just a 6th grade student, and too small to break down the door. He stopped pounding on the door, and I kept hearing some other noises. I couldn't make out what they were, but I thought he might have been scratching the door with his fingernails. I never would have considered doing this if I wasn't so terrified, but I went and grabbed my dad's pistol out of the room. This was an act that would have gotten me grounded for a long time. But I had to do something. However, when I got back to the door, he wasn't there. I didn't see him anywhere around either. Steve must have had a knife on him, and he used it to stab the door multiple times. He also then carved into the front door dead meat, an obvious threat toward me. It often made me wonder what he would have done if he had caught me. This earned Steve a stay in juvie. There was more than enough evidence that he had done it. My family moved before he got out. Number 4, back room. My grandparents lived in an old house out in the country. I always enjoyed visiting when I was a kid because it was so different than what I was used to. I always slept in a really small room at the back of the house. It was barely big enough for the bed that was in it. There wasn't a door on the opening either. There were normally curtains hung up to block the doorway from the rest of the house. There were windows in the room that faced out into the back of the house, which led to the hen house and the garden. I was often the last one to go to sleep at night. I had a book light and I would stay up in the dark reading. It got so quiet out there that it was easy to get immersed in the book. One night, I was awake in bed and reading my book. Suddenly, I heard a strange commotion coming from the backyard. The chickens seemed to be getting excited about something, which was weird so late at night. I switched off my light so that I could see better, and I tried to make out what was going on. I immediately thought that maybe a fox or something had gotten one of the chickens. I couldn't see anything except for a few chickens who were out of the hen house. This was also very strange, as they were never really out at night. However, I didn't see a fox or any other animals out there, so I went back to reading my book. It wasn't very long after that another sound caught my attention. It was a tapping sound on the back of the house. Again, I turned off my light and looked out the window, strangely thinking that maybe a chicken had been pecking on the house or something. Like before, I didn't see anything outside, and eventually went back to reading my book. I heard the tapping sound again, and I ignored it the second time. There could have been plenty of explanations for what it could have been. I just wasn't concerned. However, at one point, I must have seen some movement or something out of the corner of my eye because I looked out the window. For one moment before it disappeared, I saw that someone was looking in the window at me. It was only the eyes and upwards of a face looking in, above the window pane, and it was only for a really quick moment. Scared, I jumped up and slid off the bed and out of the room. I ran and began pounding on my grandparents' room. My grandpa answered the door, and I told him that someone was outside and was watching me from the window. Disgruntled, Grandpa grabbed his rifle and went out the back door of the house. I heard him fire the gun and heard him yelling something as well. I couldn't make out the exact words that he was saying, though. When he came back in, he told me it was fine and to go back to bed. I did so, but I was still scared, not knowing what had happened. He told me later it was a guy who lived up in the hills by himself. He would come down and break into people's homes and steal things. He would kill chickens, too. Fortunately, he hadn't had a chance to get any this time. He had probably seen the light from the book light in that room and decided to try and scare me. Well, it worked. I'm just glad my grandpa was there to scare him right back. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, as usual, I want to thank all of my paid Patreon subscribers, starting with my 2 VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Stinky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli Clark, and Broken Angel. I hope that everyone is having a good time and that you were able to make the stream last night. If not, I will have another one coming out later in the week. Plus, I'm going to try my best to do these on Saturdays, but like I mentioned in the stream, I won't be doing one this Saturday because it's WrestleMania weekend and you guys know I'm a pro wrestling fan and I'm going to be moderating a chat room, so I won't be able to do a live stream during the shows or after the shows, so I'll try to figure out something in this week. If I do it the night before, I will go ahead and put up a thumbnail about 24 hours before the stream, just so everyone can know when it will be. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of new content. Leave me a comment, which I'll try to get back to as soon as possible, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. And now I'd like to mention all of my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lind, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, Evil Black Cat, Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, Krystal Robin, Hillbilly 13, RhettSchall, John Tull, Baby and Baby, Sherry Hubbard, and Vina Waldren. But most importantly, don't forget to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.